How you guys doing? Good conference so far? You guys getting tired or you guys still have energy? Yeah? Okay, after lunch. My name is William Lam. I'm a senior staff solutions architect working VMware in our cloud infrastructure business group. Sort of cover a lot of different areas. Our core product is the VMware Cloud Foundation, obviously, but also some of our hyperscaler VMware Cloud solutions, some of our storage offerings, networking, et cetera. And this session is a little bit different. If you've attended some of these sort of VMTM Tech Talks, I figure that I want to give some of that time back to our users and our audience. So this is sort of a ask me anything, within reason, obviously. So obviously you guys showed up. Hopefully you guys have some questions. Anything that you guys are interested in, maybe things that you've heard about at the conference, maybe something you've been trying to accomplish, maybe a problem or issue that you might have run into. But yeah, floors is yours. If not, we're going to be sitting here for 30 minutes. Anybody? Come on, there's a brave soul. There you go. There you go. Yeah, no, great question, and thanks for taking that first question. So I'll just repeat the question for everybody, especially for the recording. If I understood correctly, you're interested in sort of the VCDR, which is our disaster recovery solution. And then the gentleman was asking about sort of, there's some APIs there, and it sounds like you're typically automating with PowerShell then? And it's a little bit limited at this point in time, and you're just interested in, is there any further development, et cetera? Right, yeah. I get in trouble when I talk about roadmap, because I just tell you what we're building now. Yeah, I'm actually familiar with that because, so I don't know if you're familiar that we actually had a VCDR, I think it's a PowerShell module that was released by VMware. I'm not sure if you were aware of that or not. It is, yeah. So today, the VCDR solution, we definitely have APIs. I think the initial focus was to provide some initial inventory APIs, so basically mostly Git APIs to be able to see my backups, to see the replication processes. And over time, we wanted to add more write APIs in there to be able to configure the sites and set up the entire configuration. So I know one of the engineering teams, they're both working on the API development and starting to expose this functionality. And then for ease of consumption, you can consume it as a RESTful API, or you can use the PowerShell module, which is currently open source. And they're constantly adding net new functionality to that. And so we can definitely talk offline and connect you with the product manager, because I think they would love to sort of hear what are the next set of APIs that you would like to kind of consume. And also from a tooling standpoint, I know you're using PowerShell. Any other folks in the audience using PowerShell or PowerCLI? Okay, a lot of hands are with that. So typically really popular, but I know there's also other users that want to consume in Python, maybe Go, and even Java for that example. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, man, what a question. So the question was, thank you for that, was sort of how do I keep up with all the things that I do from a blogging standpoint, hobbies, family, and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's a little bit of prioritization, but it's also just investing in time. I can still remember when I was an admin, right? Like, I didn't always know the VMware APIs as well as I know it today, right? It's taken me a really long time to really learn about it. And day one, sort of like, oh man, I don't think I'm going to be able to figure this out, right? And it's just spending a little bit of time, and you kind of have to figure out what is that amount of time, right? If you look at your entire week, how is that allocated? How much time are you spending in your day-to-day job? How much time are you spending on extra hobbies? And typically, I talk to a lot of customers where they want to go from, I want to automate, but I don't know where to start. And a lot of times, what we end up telling our customers and our users is to take a look at the things that are really mundane, the things that you do on a regular basis. And typically, the most basic things are like things like reporting. Coming in, is the environment healthy or not, right? And taking a look at that, because the nice thing about that from an automation standpoint is that you can learn about sort of read-only APIs where you're not going to affect the infrastructure. And just spending like an hour a week, or an hour a month that's dedicated to that, whether it's trying something out, maybe doing a hands-on lab, maybe doing a tutorial online. We're really lucky in 2023, you can pretty much learn anything on the internet, whether it's like YouTube, Pluralsight, and it's really dependent on sort of how you learn best. And for me personally, it's having a particular use case or business problem that I'm trying to solve for, and that's how I operate. When I was a customer, I would look at all the different things in my organization, and what are the things that it's like, man, this is something that I don't want to do, but it's something that you need to do, and it takes up so much of your time. These are really the low-hanging fruits to take a look at, and a lot of it was reporting. So when I got out of college and I joined my first company, they're like, you're not touching the VMware infrastructure. You just got out of college, right? And so they gave me access to vCenter, but I got a read-only account. You can't do a whole lot with read-only, right? And so as I was learning about the company and the different standard operating procedures that I had to learn about the infrastructure, I found out that every so often, hardware fails, right? Not really a surprise. And when that happens, vSphere HA takes over and VMs are restarted, right? We all know that, right? But there was an impact to the business. And that impact was, well, these are the VMs that were affected, they're restarted. Well, who are the system owners? Who are the application owners? What are the applications that they manage that they need to now go check to see if it's healthy? And what I found out was that we had a change management database. Not every organization has that, right? Sometimes it's on a spreadsheet. Sometimes you just don't know, and you're asking your colleague, like, hey, whose VM is this? And whoever was on call that weekend, you didn't want to have a host failure because you had to go and look up all this information. And sometimes these VMs were hosting 10, 20, 30, 50, 60 applications. And then we had to send an email one by one to say, hey, system owner, for this Windows VM, for this Linux VM, please go contact your application owners and check to see if the applications are up and running. And so that was sort of the opportunity that I saw coming out to say, well, I only have a read-only account. I can't do a whole lot. But I kind of knew, like, hey, is there a way to correlate the virtual machines, the system owner, and the application data? So I wrote some scripts to basically connect all that information out there so that when vSphere HA took over, one of the nice things about this vCenter event is it tells you all the VMs that were restarted. So I already got the list of VMs. I have the CMDB that has the VM name, the application owner, and all the different applications and the owners to each of those applications. Then it just became a really small task to basically put all the data together. And because each owner had an email address, I automatically generated a custom email report that said, your application, this version, these are your VMs that are affected. Please go log in and confirm it. And so something that would take hours, I don't even need to be awake for that to happen, right? And it was sort of these little tiny things. And again, it's not that I completed this whole task in one go. It took me several weeks to months to get this report going. But it was sort of like, can I query the VMs from vCenter? What does vCenter give me? Where is this information that I need to look for? Is it in a central place? Is it exposed as an API? We actually did not have APIs back then for the CMDB. So I had to learn SQL queries, right? And a lot of it I just did not know, so I had to go search online. And so it's spending a little bit of time, and over a month, couple of months' time, I arrived at the desired outcome with just the read-only account into the infrastructure. I was able to automate that task, and now that is one thing that anybody that was on call no longer has to kind of capture, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of these types of tasks that is still something that you need to deal with today in 2023. This is not a unique problem, right? And so it's really thinking about those very problematic things that you need to do, and how do you break up the problem into small chunks and then slowly attack the problem. And then over time, what I found was that, oh, there's this use case, there's this API I need to use. And over time, you start to build a better understanding of the product, which was vSphere at the time. But then obviously over time, we have things like Lab Manager, vSAN, and NSX. And so to date, somebody can say, hey, I want to automate this. I can tell you exactly where it is in the API, because I've been able to spend time learning about the foundation of how to do automation, and it just becomes easier and easier, right? So just like anything, you're not going to learn it day one, right? It takes practice. If you're playing an instrument, it's practice, practice, practice. And so same thing with automation. And for me personally, back to the topic of like blogging, a lot of it is taking that and sharing that with others so that I've solved something, I can help you, and then maybe you might be able to use that solution to solve another particular problem. So I found that to be really insightful because it made sure that I can explain how something works, right? And ultimately share, and that's really why VMware is such a special community, right? Is that there's all these different bloggers that I'm sure you follow, even the ones that I follow, and it's really finding that balance, right? And so it's not like I'm constantly blogging. There's a lot of things that I work on where it's months, sometimes even years. And so what you see is just blogs getting published. What you don't see is the work behind it, right? So at the end of the day, it's hard work, right? But it's something that you just have to kind of build into your day-to-day lives and say, how much of that time am I going to invest in yourself? Ultimately, it's an investment in yourself, right? And I know that there are people who's like, you know what? I don't want to learn anything. I don't want to automate. That sounds like a developer, right? But I'm sure in all of your organizations, your managers are not saying, here's all these resources, here's all this funding you're getting. You're being asked to do more with less, right? And I think a really important skill set is to really think about where are the ways you can optimize, because once you solve those problems, you now have time back to now focus on new and interesting things, whether ARIA, whether it's networking security, private AI, maybe you want to do some Kubernetes. I know a lot of folks want to learn, but it's just like they have all these really mundane tasks that they haven't really solved, and so it prevents them from learning new things and kind of growing your skill set. So hopefully that helped answer your question. Yeah, and always have fun too, right? I do a lot of hiking. I have 2 kids, so they keep me busy, but do a lot of hiking to get outside and get away from the computer. And for me, like sometimes when I get stuck, doing something that's not technical is the best thing, because sometimes you'll just go out for a walk, go play with your kids, and then you're like, I've got the answer, and a lot of times you figure that out as well too. So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, go for it. If I heard correctly, you were saying that these are lab environments. Are they like VMs or like in-user devices? I see. And specifically virtual machines, you mean? Okay. So the question was, how do I provision workloads like VMs and kind of provide it to different teams for access, maybe for testing, dev tests, like very common use case. And how do I sort of manage that at scale before you apply that to maybe physical devices and all that, right? There's a couple of, it's a great question. It's a really classic, dev test type of a use case, right? Like here's this VM or sets of VMs, collection of applications, and how do I reproduce that? And anybody here taken hands-on labs before? All right, that's exactly what we're doing, right? We take these VMs, we install applications on them. It could be VMware software, it can be third-party software. We create it into a template, right? And then we stamp it out, right, for every user. So every person that goes takes a hands-on lab, it's exactly the same, right? And it's for repeatability, but then there's also some benefits because we can now clone from it, and instantly you have a full vSphere environment, an ARIA environment, and so there's different ways of achieving that outcome, right? Typically what I'll ask customers is sort of, do you have a development team? Do you have a couple hundred developers that can build that for you? Typically the answer is no. And so you can do that, and I come from that world. I used to work for a very large enterprise, and this was before the days of vCloud Director. And so we basically built our own version of vCloud Director using the vSphere APIs and doing things like linked clone, where you're able to basically do copy and write, so we can duplicate these workloads very, very quickly, just like you see in hands-on labs. But if you're not looking to build it yourself, there's different products and solutions. Like even the hands-on labs, I forget the offering, but they have their own offering where we'll manage the service for you. You bring your workloads and your templates, and you can use the infrastructure to basically deliver your own hands-on labs within your own organization. So that's one option. We also have our Cloud Director service. So this is vCloud Director that gives you this kind of multi-tenancy, capture these VMs and call via templates, and provides the same exact concept. And in fact, that's what the hands-on lab teams are using, right? So you can purchase something that you can run in your on-premises environment if that's what you need, or it can be a managed service where I don't want to run that infrastructure, but I want the ability to deploy those things. So that's another option. And then we also have a lot of partners who provide those capabilities, through their own custom tooling. And it's a really common request of saying, here are these workloads, right? And even something like ARIA automation, if you've got the VM templates, you can use something like ARIA automation to create these blueprints. And then you provide this self-service portal, right, to your end user to say, hey, I want this application stack. It's got all the database, everything fully configured. Maybe there's some input parameters and maybe there's some costing to it. And so these are all kind of the different options to achieve something of that particular outcome. Yeah. Hopefully that would help though. Okay, cool. Any other questions? Remember, this is your guys' time. If not, it's gonna be like another 14 minutes. Yeah, go for it. Okay.
Any recommendations of resources going down that path? How do we achieve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, you should attend my home lab session because I'm actually going to cover some of those topics in there. But I'll repeat the question. It's sort of, he's got a home lab. He's interested in sort of exploring VMware Cloud Foundation. You've got a couple of large systems, basically. How best might you deploy VMware Cloud Foundation, whether it's onto the physical server, whether I do it in a nested virtualization, so basically running VCF within VMs on top of your physical option. And it really just depends on sort of what outcome you're trying to look for. You can certainly use those boxes as is and deploy VMware Cloud Foundation. Now, for those that aren't familiar with the requirements for production workloads, they do require a certain number of nodes, anywhere from 4 to maybe up to 8 if you want to have a management domain as well as a workload domain. Now, if you just want experience with it, you don't actually need that number of hosts. And there's sort of 2 ways to achieve it. The first is to be able to use nested virtualization, right? So you can deploy multiple ESX VMs, and then that becomes your host where you then deploy VMware Cloud Foundation. You can certainly go down that path. But if you're constrained on resources, because I know not most people don't have infinite amount of resources, I certainly don't, then the other option is that you can actually deploy a subset of the components, right? And you can use different types of tools. There are some of these things in my blogs that covers how do you sort of deploy VCF, including the latest 5.x release, on a single host. And there's this really awesome toolkit called the Holo, it's like VMware Cloud Foundation Holo Toolkit, and it can all run in one physical host. And what it provides you is nested ESXi, but they also provide a virtual router, and that basically creates a bubble on this physical host. And so here, it does require a fair amount of memory, but certainly a lot less than if you were to deploy a physical VMware Cloud Foundation setup. So rather than 8 hosts, it's one physical host. You just need vanilla ESXi installed and a basic vSwitch. That's it. You download this toolkit completely free, and you run the script, and it deploys the full management domain as well as workload domain for you in like 2 hours time. And this is literally production grade deployments, but it's all happening in VMs. And because it's providing you virtual networking, there's no physical networking that you need to have. Just a regular ESXi host. You don't even need vCenter. So this is a great way to experience VMware Cloud Foundation. If you want to especially play with like VVSs, go through an upgrade scenario, play with NSX, right? And so that's sort of the one, the recommended path, because you will get the best experience of VMware Cloud Foundation because it's literally the full stack. There's no shortcuts. Now, if you're constrained on resources, you can make some tweaks to reduce the requirements of VMware Cloud Foundation. And I see you're smiling, so you were like, I like that. And so on my blog, I actually show you how you can actually deploy VCF on an Intel NUC with just 64 gigs of memory. Yeah. So there are definitely ways to optimize that, right? And so again, it all just depends on sort of what is your goal, what is your focus? Like, is it to learn about the VCF APIs? Is it to learn to how do I deploy a workload domain so I can deploy Kubernetes, deploy AI workloads? Is it to maybe test an upgrade? Maybe you want to go from 4.x to 5.x, or I'm going to go from 5.0 to 5.1. I want to see what that looks like. Don't do that in production. Set up a lab, go through that scenario. If you mess up, rebuild it again, right? And if you do it in nested, the really nice thing about nested, because I also have a Power CLI script that will deploy VCF for you. The nice thing about that is if you make a mistake, just delete it. Run the script again in about an hour's time, you now have the full thing fully configured. right? So I'm a huge fan of automation, and why I continue to stress it, that it's not just for automating tasks that you have, but it helps you in your day-to-day job to understand this is the upgrade scenario. Your manager is asking you, like, how do you fall back? You can take screenshots. There's so many different use cases for it. And so those are kind of the different ways. And I've got some other topics, but I do have a home lab session for tomorrow. If you weren't able to make the breakout session early on Monday, I do have another session tomorrow if you want to look in this calendar. That's all about how to run all these different VMware solutions on top of home lab gear like an Intel NUC. And it's literally every product that we have, you can run it because it's software, right? And the point here is that you don't need to have a very expensive lab to be able to learn about these technologies. And so if you guys are interested, definitely recommend sign up for that session if you're interested. Yeah. Oh, VCF HoloKit. Yeah, if you search for it on my blog, it's also on there, but it's something that the technical marketing team for VMware Cloud Foundation, they produce it. And it's a fantastic tool because you download it, you bring your Windows ISO image, it basically creates a jump host for you, sets up Active Directory, all the networking policies, and so once you're done, you can basically RDP into the system, and you've got the full VCF deployment there. And you can do multiple versions of these deployments. So we actually have some of our partners using this toolkit to deliver training for their organization. And because it just requires a single physical host, as long as you meet the memory requirements, it sets everything up for you. Yeah. So really neat solution. So I really like that one. Yeah. It's a home state of the union for home labs. Yeah, or you just search my name. It should. I think. Yeah, I don't remember what time it is tomorrow, but yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, it's not. I don't know the time. It comes up as a CTEC section. Oh, you know what? I think it's not. You know what? I think it's not schedulable in the app, but it. I'll need to find, yeah, maybe I can find a way for them to email everybody who registered here if you're interested in the session. But there is a session tomorrow, but I don't know if it's actually schedulable in the app itself. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep. Yep.
From your point of view, what is the best way to automate vCenter post-configuration tasks, such as Active Directory integration, managing role, permission, all this kind of stuff? Because sometimes I use Ansible, sometimes API calls, sometimes I need to go on SSH vCenter to run some tasks. What is the best way for you?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, I think you were asking, what is the best way to automate configuration changes to vCenter? Is that correct? Yeah. No, that's a great question. So obviously vCenter has a number of different API surfaces, right? And so vCenter, and I'm assuming you're asking about vCenter configurations, not so much the workloads, right? So vCenter itself has an appliance API that allows you to basically manage things like networking, NTP, syslog, backups, and that's a RESTful API. And that covers most of the configurations you would normally do, including things like backups. I don't know if that's something that you're interested in or if there's some other ones. There are some other settings that we may not have APIs, but the really nice thing about the vSphere platform is that while vCenter is a product that has its own APIs, the other interesting thing to keep in mind is that vSphere is a platform. And vCenter, if you look at it, it's just another VM that's got an OS on it. It's got VMware tools. And there's this really powerful API called the Guest Operations API. And so I would use that API in conjunction with the vCenter APIs for things that you need to do inside of the guest. I'll give you a good example. Some Linux systems, when they go into read-only mode, it'll prompt you with like a login, you need to type a password or something like that, and it just gets stuck. So that means you as an admin need to open up the console, type something, close it up. And if you have a lot of those VMs, it's really difficult to automate. But using the Guest Operations API, I can actually send in keys, strokes into the VM as if you're sitting there and typing. In fact, if you want to scare your colleagues, you can do that. And this API operates at lower level than the virtual hardware, so it doesn't need VMware tools to be running. So you can send in keys, and so I've been able to automate things that are just unautomatable. In fact, I was able to automate, some configurations for Windows 3.1, which has no VMware tools on it, right? And so using this particular API, you can send in keystrokes, so passwords, and so you can use things like OCR to take a picture, because we actually have an API that allows you to take a screenshot of the VM. And you can say, yep, this VM has crashed, or Linux kernel panic. And with all the different technologies today, you can go through an OCR process to decode that image, translate it into basically text, and then you can parse it out and say, oh, this VM has gotten stuck. Let me go look up its password, use the API to send the keys, and I fully automate it. And the reason I tell you that is that you can really go through a lot of different types of things that were just, there's no API for to do that. But using this guest operations API and even sending these keystrokes, you're now able to automate things that weren't possible before. And so going back to your question, there are a lot of things that we don't have APIs for, unfortunately, for vCenter, but because of this lower level platform API, and because vCenter has VMware tools, I can do certain types of automation that just isn't possible. So now I can actually automate something that was not automatable. And you can take that and apply that to other types of workloads, right? So depending on the use case, right? Like if I've got a VM that has VMware tools, I can use this guest operations API and interact with it. And it doesn't bypass security. You still need to log in. So you have to have a valid login, right? So if you don't have a login or if you don't have the permissions, you're not gonna be able to do anything with it. And then in other cases, you'll be able to use the lower level APIs to send keystrokes. So these are some examples on how you can do that. I'm getting the wrap up. So again, I really want to thank you for your time and really awesome. Thank you for the questions.